Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Arwin Mercado, reporter for INQUIRER.net. So yesterday nga nakausap natin si Sir Gary J. Montemayor where we talked about the importance of science communication dito sa panahon ng mga natural calamities katulad ng itong recent Super Typhoon Rolly, Typhoon Quinta. And today, we're going to talk about a part of some sort pagdating sa topic na yan. But this time in the context of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Well, the Philippines continues to grapple with this pandemic. As of November 4, there are more than 388,000 COVID-19 cases in the country, of which over 349,000 have recovered. And joining us here today to talk about the importance of science communication in this time of pandemic is Chair of the Department of Science Communication, College of Development Communication in the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Professor Elaine Llarena. Ma'am, good morning. Kamusta ka, ma'am?
Morning, Neil. Okay naman. Yeah.
Sa mga...
good. Yeah.
Ma'am Elaine is also a former professor of mine. So basically ngayon, nanghihila lang ako ng mga former professors para makausap natin in this topic. But this is a very important topic that we're going to discuss here today, Ma'am Elaine. So today, Ma'am Elaine, we're going to talk about the coronavirus pandemic. Patuloy nga tayong patuloy nating lalabanan itong pandemyang ito.
Yeah.
And so the question now is, what makes science communication, what makes its role crucial dito sa ating laban against the pandemic?
Yeah, let me share my thoughts of how I think more than ever mas nakikita yung importansya ng science communication. I think I'm sure you might agree with me that with the pandemic that happened, mas doon nakita na kailangan natin ng science communication. And it also made us think, ano nga bang estado ng science communication dito sa Philippines? And also, it could be an opportunity, this time, could be an opportunity for us to think about ano pa ba yung kailangan gawin? Because we've been doing science communication, not just during this pandemic, pero even before with the technologies that Filipinos are doing, with agriculture, with a lot of sectors, science communication is present. Pero makikita lang natin na mas na-highlight at mas nare-realize natin ang importansya ng science communication kasi nakikita na natin kung paano rin nagre-respond ang mga tao sa ngayon with the COVID-19. And I think it's not just in the Philippines, but worldwide, mas nakikita yung importansya on how science should be and needed to be communicated.
So ano po ba sa tingin niyo, Ma'am Elaine, yung role na gagampanan ng science communication in helping the public understand paano natin lalabanan itong pandemic, not just kung paano natin lalabanan, but also the concepts within this topic?
Yeah. I think in this time of pandemic, with the COVID-19, siguro ang gusto kong i-emphasize is how science communication should be able to communicate the situation, which is siguro yung uncertainty. Kasi we live in this, we already have to face the fact that we already live in a complex society. So, hindi na simple yung mga solutions. So, with that complexities, mahalaga ang role ng science communication. Let me go back to the concept of uncertainty. Kasi with this pandemic, kasi sanay tayo, our human nature is that we want to always be in control. So dapat alam natin yung gagawin natin. Pero yung nature kasi ng science, especially yung nature ng science, ang nature of science hindi siya absolute, hindi siya laging certain. So part of the nature of science is there could be uncertainty. Kaya nga tayo nagre-research because what we know today would be different tomorrow, would be different 10 years from now siguro, 'di ba? So with this pandemic, siguro mahalaga ang role ng science communication is ma-communicate natin tong nature of science and the nature of uncertainty. So halimbawa, with this pandemic, 'di ba? Literature there has been very many literature saying that mangyayari itong next pandemic. I mean, scientists has already been communicating about this. And I think hindi naman lang din walang I would want personally, I think the science community has been there doing their work of doing research. they have been warning that there are new viruses coming in. We've had a lot. We have avian influenza, we had MERS-CoV, and now we had SARS even before. So, and we already know about the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. So the scientists has already been warning us with this. So I would say that yung uncertainty kasi, yung point na yun na kailangan alam natin or nako-communicate natin na merong such thing as uncertainty. So what do we do about it? So yun yung pumapasok yung risk communication. I think yesterday, Sir Gary differentiated what science communication is from risk communication. So siguro dito sa context ng pandemic, nandun yung risk communication. Kasi pag sinabi nating risk communication, we don't know everything about that. Kaya siya risk eh. Kasi it may happen, it may not happen. But how do we communicate that? Siyempre, ang una dyan na dapat nako-communicate natin is not to cause panic. Kasi yun talaga yung number one. And I think if you're familiar with risk communication, yun yung laging tinuturo. Or even sa media, the role is when you're reporting something of a risk communication context, you should not create panic. Kasi pagka may panic na, 'di ba? Yung emotions natin heightened na, so we don't get to think things straightly, 'di ba? So, yun yung isang kaya yung science communication related din siya on how we communicate the risks involved in this pandemic. So, yung uncertainty, yung nature ng pagiging uncertain ng mga bagay, it needs to be communicated. And another is that the risks. So, for example, dati when the pandemic happened, alam lang natin na pagka humahatching ka, doon lang siya natatransfer. Tapos, later, parang dati hindi natin alam na through air, pwede rin pala siyang matransmit yung virus. Pero nalalaman natin yun kasi habang nangyayari itong pandemic, nagkakaroon ng mga pag-aaral. And that's also where science communication has a role. Na ano ba na yung mga pag-aaral na nangyayari? Kasi sinusubaybayan natin itong COVID-19. Wala pa dyan wala pa tayong vaccines. Dinidevelop pa yung vaccines. Ano pa yung konsepto ng vaccines? Kasi maiisip natin na may mga may mga science communication issues din on vaccination kasi marami tayong mga kababayan would have different perceptions on vaccination. So paano to na ang COVID-19 itong kinakaharap natin, ang isang nakikitang lunas, well, not the term lunas, pero yung kung paano natin siya maa-address at wag na siyang masyadong kumalat is vaccination. Pero ano nga ba yung perception ng tao sa vaccination? So pag nandiyan na ba yung bakuna, lahat ba tayo gusto nating magpabakuna? Ano yung mga fears ng mga tao sa pagbabakuna? So I think there are a lot of concerns, a lot of issues, a lot of potentials where we can communicate science in this time of pandemic.
I agree with you, ma'am. Kasi even the concept of pandemic in itself nga, baka it's, what is the difference between epidemic and pandemic? You know, ma'am, may mga ganyang mga usapin. But unlike yesterday, we talked about natural calamities. It happens more often than a pandemic. Fortunately, na hindi ganong kadalas itong mga pandemya na ganito. When the coronavirus pandemic happened, I think yung last pa na pandemya talaga, I believe is I'm not sure if it's MERS-CoV or SARS, but it's been a while since Philippines is directly affected by a pandemic. So medyo, Ma'am Elaine, it is safe to assume na medyo hindi familiar lalo with ang Filipinos with regard to pandemic scientific concepts, the risks involving pandemic. So, Ma'am Elaine, may ba efforts to communicate better itong pandemya to the public?
I think there are, personally. But there are, pero marami pang kailangan gawin. Kasi tama ka, Neil, hindi familiar sa atin itong sitwasyon ng isang pandemya. At saka tayo, whether we accept it or not, we don't tend to do things, take action, or believe if it's not in front of us already. So I think, kaya nga sa akin, dito sa sitwasyon natin, mahalaga ang role ng science communication sa science literacy encouraging science culture. Kasi sa mga ganitong sitwasyon, if we base our decisions, every Filipino, regardless of status, regardless of education, pero kung may science culture tayo, kapag nagde-decision kasi tayo, alam natin na nakabase siya sa science. Or even if hindi ka ganun ka familiar, pero if you encourage or if each Filipino has that science culture, when we try to make decisions, iisipin natin sino ba nagsabi nito, base ba to sa siyensya? Saan ba to? Sino ba ang nagsasabi sa atin na ganito ang gawin? Pero kumbaga nandun yung inherent sa atin yung science culture. So in that context, I think the government has been doing efforts in terms of science literacy, science education. But of course, it's not a ano kasi siya, as what I've said kanina, this is a complex issue. And ang complexities nito, hindi lang science communication dito. Science communication also has a role or has to have that interdisciplinary approach din, or transdisciplinary, if I may say. So, parang when we communicate science, hindi lang ako, for example, as a development communication practitioner and educator, I'm communicating science, but also other disciplines can communicate science, especially. So we have the scientists, the public health officials or public health researchers, scientists. We have the animal health, because you see, in this pandemic was brought about by a zoonosis or zoonotic diseases. So pag sinabi nating zoonotic diseases, ito yung mga sakit na galing sa hayop na natatransfer sa tao. So these things, so as going back to what I'm saying, I think the government has been doing that effort of increasing science culture, science literacy. But of course, marami pa tayong kailangan gawin. Ang dami pa nating dapat gawin. And then there also I would want to acknowledge also the efforts of science journalists. I would classify or I would qualify them as science journalists because I think dumadami na rin naman yung mga nagkakaroon ng interest sa pagre-report at pagbabalita ng mga science information, or yun nga, mga science journalists and media practitioners who are also supporting this endeavor of really communicating science. So siguro in terms of challenges siguro na makikita ko, marami pa rin naman na tayong kailangan gawin. Kasi makikita naman natin siya kung how, 'di ba? I could not mention, I mean, makita lang natin siya naturally na kailangan pa, marami pang kailangan gawin. But I think we're getting there. But we still have to do a lot of things.
You mentioned, Ma'am Elaine, that we still have to do a lot of things, that we can still improve on it. What do you think po are those things that we can improve in?
Yeah, I think one is, ako talaga, I'm always advocating for strengthening our science culture, our science literacy. Another is that we have to learn, and I think development communication has always have this role of facilitating exchanges of information. And these exchanges of information should be in an interdisciplinary manner. So pag sinabi nating interdisciplinary, when we have an issue at hand, especially with this pandemic, hindi na lang siya problema kasi ng isang sector or ng isang discipline. It is a collaborative effort. And I think that is very important in how also our government should think of policies, should think of actions, or even messages that we want to communicate, na hindi lang kasi siya from the perspective ng isang discipline or ng isang sector. And yung transdisciplinary, this concept, what makes it different, pag sinabi natin transdisciplinary naman, is we put in the sectoral. So for example, pag ito ay, ang transdisciplinary yung approach natin dito ay dapat sinasama natin yung mga tao sa communities, the local communities. It should not just be a top to bottom approach, but the communities also. So for example, if we are ang mga messaging natin ay social distancing, 'di ba? Pero how do we contextualize social distancing in our country? I'm not saying there's an easy way of doing it, kasi paano kaya natin mako-contextualize yun? How would we do social distancing in a place or in our house, for example, pag nagkaroon ng may kaso? dikit-dikit, I mean, ilan tayong nakatira sa isang bahay, 'di ba? Or even with our population, ang dami-dami nating Pilipino. So, paano yung social distancing na tinatawag? Tapos minsan sa akin, palagay ko lang na yung mga konsepto na ini-introduce natin, if this is what the science community or the researchers are recommending, pero kailangan din natin siyang parang ihain sa local people or sa layman na paano nga ba natin mako-contextualize ang social distancing? Or is there another way of how we can also mitigate this pandemic in our own local context? Isa rin yun sa siguro kailangan natin sa science communication, that science communication also would want to encourage local knowledge or ina-acknowledge din dapat kung ano yung mga perceptions or understanding ng local communities para mas madali nating ma-facilitate yung exchange of information at ma-narrow natin yung misunderstandings, miscommunication. So I think yun nandun din ang role ng science communication.
Kasi, as you mentioned nga, Ma'am Elaine, no? Even doon sa social distancing, not everyone would know gaano ba kalayo ang 6 feet social distancing, di ba, ma'am? Na hindi siya yung tipo na you know exactly this is 6 feet. If you are...
Tsaka yung pag sinabi na ano ba ang prescribed natin, 1 meter ba? 1 meter. So, paano natin, I think, paano natin siya mako-communicate yung 1 meter? Kasi tayong mga Pinoy, di ba? Tayong mga Pilipino, hindi tayo yung pag sinabi yung number, gets natin agad. That's the kind of culture or that's the kind of how yung thought processing natin. So, kailangan, di ba, scenario ni Sir Gary na we might kailangan natin siyang not really translate, pero paano ba natin yung ma-visualize or paano natin mai-illustrate in a sense that magigets agad ng tao. So, ano ba yung isang metro, isang dipa? Or di ba, ewan ko ikaw nung bata ka, di ba, parang paano ka nagme-measure ng isang dipa? Yung ganito ba? Di ba? So, parang, although tama, hindi siya precise as what science would prefer, pero ito yung mga bagay na kailangan pa rin natin siyang ma-communicate para at least naiintindihan nila kung saan nanggagaling itong mga impormasyon na to or bakit mahalaga itong mga impormasyon na to. Diba? For example, wearing of masks. Bakit kailangan kang magsuot ng masks? Naiintindihan kaya natin kung bakit. So pag tinanong natin, bakit, hindi lang kasi siya dapat na parang, kasi sinabi ng gobyerno or pinrescribe, kasi hindi ka papapasukin sa bangko or sa mall or sa palengke kapag wala kang masks. Pero bakit? Bakit? Dapat naiintindihan natin siya. Bakit kailangan ng masks? At ang masks ay protection mo ba? Laban or ikaw, pinoprotektahan mo yung ibang tao? Kasi ngayon, ang messaging is you wear masks because you want also to protect others and not just protecting you. Because we don't know, dahil wala naman tayong mass testing, hindi natin alam kung may COVID tayo or not. So, tayo din, responsibilidad natin yun na mag-mask tayo kasi ayaw din natin na mahawa ang ibang tao. So, those things na dapat nako-communicate din natin siya at naiintindihan siya ng bawat Pilipino sana.
So, ma'am, just a few more questions. When we talk about these efforts, two things come in mind personally: the role of the government/policymakers and the role of the media. Saan pumapasok sa usaping ito ang gobyerno na gumagawa ng mga polisiya natin at ang media?
Yeah, in my personal view, ang laking bagay ng policies. Pero I think aside from crafting the policies, part of it is how we implement it. Because I would think like when you get to read what IAT, the Interagency Task Force, the policies, it's there, it's laid down. Sometimes it's just a matter of how we implement it. So mahalaga yon, hindi lang yung paggawa ng mga polisiya, paggawa ng regulations, pero yung pag-implement niya at yung tamang pag-implement at I think yung stringent na pag-i-implement. Of course, with the government that we have, malaking bagay din talaga ang role ng mga local government units because that's how our government works. Hindi lang din siya nakaasa talaga. I think hindi lang kasi siya dapat nakaasa sa central government. as what I've been saying kanina, collaboration is important in this time of pandemic. So collaboration in terms of policies din na the national government, the local government, they plays a big role on how yung dynamics. So mahalaga ang policy. So if you're asking me, may policies tayo, nandyan siya, na-lay down siya. So it's a matter of implementing it and how we empower the communities or the local people, or how we encourage them to follow these regulations and these policies. Kasi marami. I mean, nandyan na siya. Now, in terms of the role of the media, of course, malaki ang role ng media. So, and media could use multiple platforms. So, hindi lang siya we have through social media or through radio. Media practitioners should have that mindset na paano ba natin ma-reach yung iba't ibang tao? Anong platforms yung gagamitin natin? So, and of course, I think media advocacy is very important in terms of yung relationship din ng mga media practitioners with the scientists. So, I think maganda kasi yun na nagkakaroon ng magandang relationship sila. So, I think yun din yung role ng media na they also have to reach out sa scientists. And yung mindset na special, ako kasi sa tingin ko, special ang pagre-report ng mga science communication, or mga science issues and science concerns. It's different from how you do news na kailangan mabilisan. Yes, of course, nandun yung time factor. But kailangan talaga na make sure mo na tama yung information na nire-relay mo, especially when it comes to science. And importante talaga doon yung pag-validate mo nung stories mo or nung tama ba yung pagkakasulat mo. And of course, maganda rin kung ang media practitioners, they try to be open on how to be educated din on how is the proper reportage of science stories. Kasi iba siya eh. I would think, ako personally, I find na iba siya. Iba siguro yung atake ng isang journalist, ng isang media practitioner pag science stories ang ating pag-uusapan.
My last question, Ma'am Elaine, would be something that you already touched on actually, itong local communities. You mentioned earlier na they also play a role here.
Yeah.
How important is it that we reach these local communities in the middle of this pandemic, that to make sure that they also understand? Because if you're gonna take a look at it, the numbers show na yes, the cases are in big cities. So let's say NCR, Calabarzon provinces, but at the same time, you also have cases in more na mga mas malayong areas that might have harder access to social services that they might need should they contract the disease. So how important is it that we also reach them and help them and ensure that they also understand this pandemic?
Yeah, malaki yung responsibilidad din ng government, even the media, na ma-reach itong mga communities na ito. Although, syempre minsan pwede nila i-dismiss yun kasi sinasabi nila dito sa pandemic talagang doon siya sa mga highly urbanized, yung matataas na kaso. Pero I think dapat, 'di ba, if we look at this issue in an inclusive perspective, mahalaga din na binibigyang pansin ang mga local communities. They are part of what's happening. They're also part of the solution. So hindi dapat natin sila na nakakalimutan. Tsaka minsan kasi with this pandemic kasi dahil nga pandemic siya tapos mabilis siyang kumakalat. Parang sa ngayon alam natin nasa urban community siya, or syempre most likely doon siya kakalat. Pero paano naman sa ibang paraan naman kasi sila naapektuhan nitong pandemya na to eh. Do we know the status not just of their health, the health in terms of may COVID sila or not, pero mental health nila, that's also part of this pandemic that we have to think about, their livelihoods. Nawalan sila ng trabaho, wala silang COVID, malayo sila na magkaroon ng COVID-19. Pero dahil kung lalo na especially kung mga farmers and they produce food for us, pero hindi nila maiangkat So, paapektado pa rin sila ng pandemic. So, mahalaga pa rin na tinitingnan natin yung local communities, not just on their knowledge about the pandemic or about COVID-19, but, the state of what they're doing, of how they are right now, and what needs to be done to support them in these times of pandemic. Kasi nga itong pandemic, hindi na lang siya nagiging usapin ng health issue if you would agree with me, 'di ba? Kasi nandiyan na rin yung economic, nagkakaroon din tayo ng social consciousness na ano bang nangyayari sa government natin, how do they handle it, and it has an effect on us, 'di ba? So it becomes an opportunity for us to think about a lot of things with this kind of pandemic. Kasi parang natetest tayo as a nation 'di ba? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Ma'am Elaine. I know medyo busy kayo right now, but thank you dahil naisingit nyo
Yeah.
kami sa inyong time. I hope
Thank
you're
you,
safe.
Neil. I enjoyed this interview.
Thank you so much, Ma'am. It's been a very insightful morning. Everyone, again, this is Neil Arwin Mercado, reporter for INQUIRER.net. Please stay safe.